Not yet.
Oh.
All right. So the next steps we're going to do, I need everybody to follow along very, very carefully. Okay? We're going to do this one step at a time. I need everybody's full and undivided attention, even more so than usual. Okay? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to where our server is running, and we're going to stop it. So Control C. All right? And then whether you're on Windows or Mac, everybody needs to open another terminal window or another terminal tab. So however you can open another tab or window, please do that. All right, and now I want you to navigate back to your front end folder. So it should just be cd ... if you're already in your Redux to-do list. If you're on Windows and you open your window, you might be in your home directory or some other directory. Just get back to your front end folder. All right, and then we're going to go into our original to-do list. So we're going to say cd to-do-list. All right, so you should now be in your old to-do list project. Now I want you to start your old to-do list project. So npm start. Once it starts, go to your browser, refresh. Boom, we have a working to-do list. We're done. No. So I want everybody, look at your to-do list. Make sure you have some items in your to-do list. If you do not have items in your to-do list, add a couple really quick. Okay? Make sure you have data in your to-do list. If you already have data, you're good to go. If you don't, if your list is empty, add a few items. We're going to be using your same API key to get list data into our new version. So make sure you have some items.
It's Scott.
Yes.
My add item functionality is kind of whack right now.
Unwhack it. Sucks to suck.
Well, like, what's can you be more specific?
Like the routing works, but then once I press add item, it's not adding.
Are you sure?
Yes.
If you go back to the list and refresh the page, it's not there? Do you not have any items?
I have 3 items.
That's all you need. That's fine.
3
is one. It's enough.
Yeah, 3's enough.
That's
Three's enough.
I think that's a new one.
So even if you have like 2, it's not just so that you have something in your list. Everybody have something in their list?
Yes, sir.
3. Good. I got 4. That one.
I'll add another one.
So everyone's good, right? All right. Now the next thing we're going to do is, so we have our Redux to-do list open in a code editor. I want you to open a second code editor to the old to-do list. You need both of them open at the same time. If anybody doesn't know how to do that, let me know. I'll come around and help. If you're using VS Code from your old to-do list, you could just use the code command. That will open a second window.
Okay. Scott, my code space period thing stopped working. Is there reason why you would this?
Some people have that issue,
You mean computers?
and I don't know what the solution is to it.
Because we set it up together.
Yeah, yeah, and you're not the first person to have that issue.
Should I restart something?
No, you have to reinstall it. It has something to do with where it installs it in permissions or some crap. Looked into it a little bit one time, and I don't even remember if we ever fixed it. But a few sporadic people have that. I wish I had a better answer for you.
I should have used you.
No. That's just what All right. Does everybody have their second code editor open now? So we're going to go into our old to-do list. We're going to find the helpers folder inside of src, common.js, and select everything in there and copy it. So our base URL and our API key. Once we have that copied, we're going to go to our new to-do list, and we're going to go to Actions Index and paste that in there. And then we're going to delete the export statements. So it should just be const base URL, const API key. Okay. The whole reason we did that was to get your API key, because I'm sure none of you remembered it. Okay, so in your Actions Index file, you should now have the base URL, and most importantly, you should have your API key from your previous to-do list. Did anybody have any problem with any of that? Anybody need help?
Yeah, I can't find my key. But I also don't have a.
You don't. So try and go to app.js. App.js. Scroll to the top. There you go. You also missed one where you removed everything. And then Actions Index. There you go. Everybody else? So everybody got their API key into the new project. All right. Now what we're going to do, so we don't cause any trouble, we're going to go back to our old to-do list, close that editor, make sure it's gone. Any terminal windows you had open to the old one, close, stop the server, and close any of those terminal windows. Okay, just so you don't mix anything up, get rid of all of it now. We solely did that, A, to verify you had to-do items in the database, and 2, to get your API key.
So you want us to start already that one we're working on?
You could restart the Redux version now. So, make sure you're in the right directory. It should be Redux to-do list. Restart it. Should be good to go. And if you go to your browser, refresh, you should see the new to-do list. Everybody else set? Anybody need a second? Okay. If anybody needs help with anything, just let me know.
I'm good. It's loaded. The one from 30 minutes.
Yeah, your npm install finally finished. Y'all good? All right, so now that we have all of our information, which we should have done first, but sometimes this happens. So we started making changes to our code, but we're still on master. If I type git status, oh no, there's changes on my master. All you gotta do is create a new branch when that happens. Right? It'll take all those changes with you. And they'll no longer be on master, they'll be on the new branch. So let's create a new branch before we do any more work though. So we'll say git checkout -b, and we'll say git list beta. So git, you're in the old one.
The non-redux.
You're in the non-redux one. Yep. Close that window. Get rid of it.
Okay.
Get out of here. And for that exact reason is why we want to close it.
Yeah, Redux, no. Master.
I called mine git list data. Right here. Bottom.
Uh-huh.
We all good? All good? All right. So first things first, we will create a component to display our list. So a component, we'll make a new file, and we'll just call it list.js. And similar to before, our list is going to need to make a call to the server to get the data. So we need to know when the component mounts. Therefore, we need a lifecycle method. So we need a, what type of component? Class component. So import React, curly brackets, components from React. Import React from React. Most important part of React. All right, then we'll define our class. We'll say class list extend component. And I haven't asked this one in a while. What is the one method that all class components must have? Render. I see a lot of people, and not just this class, but in other classes, when they make a class component, they'll still put the constructor there. Don't put the constructor there unless you need it. It doesn't have to be there. You don't need the constructor. Okay? All right, and then we're going to return a div, and that's the I'm going to I'm going to go to app.js, and I'm going to select my H1 and my pt-2. I really like them. And I'm going to move them over to our list component. And because I'm too lazy to retype it out. All right, and then we will export default list. All right. Are we still need a second? It's fine. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm going to close some of these files. All right. I'm going to go back over to app. And if you jumped ahead and you just imported list and put list in there, it's not what we're doing. You'll be halfway right. So first thing we're going to do is we're making a multiple page app. So we need to set up routes. So first thing we'll import is curly brackets from React router DOM. And we're going to import the route component. And inside of our, after we import our route component, now we'll import list from this directory list. And then we'll make a route for our list. So we'll say route, and we'll say path equals / and because it's the base route, we'll go ahead and put exact on there. And then we'll do component equals curly brackets list.
Does it matter where you put the exact?
You think of it as like an object, so it's ultimately what it is. So property names and an object don't matter the order. Same concept. All that matters is it's there somewhere.
So why is it we're adding list as a attribute?
Because that's what tells it to render when the path is / So. All right, so now if we go to our app, it should look pretty much unchanged. We shuffled some stuff around, but ultimately it's going to look pretty much the same. Anybody need a second? Having trouble?
Just go back to your app file.
Anybody need help?
Can I just see list on chance real quick so I can see how you wrap it to the H1 of the P? Are they just surrounded in by divs? Or?
Yep, just a div around it. Are you done here, Andrew?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, just in case you want to see it, there you go.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. All good?
Scott, in your app, did you import list as well?
Let me answer that question with another question. Are we using lists inside of that? That needs to be imported. And I don't mean that in a smart ass way as it may have sounded. For real good? For reals? Everybody's good? All right. So now what we need to do is now we need to get the data from the server. So we're using Redux. So pretty much all your calls are going to be inside of action creators now. Because action creators are what update the state. So that's where you make your Axios calls from. So since we need to update the state with our list data, that means we need an action creator. If a new action creator means a new action, which means we need to first define a type. So inside of the action types file, we'll define a new type, and we'll say get all list data. And we'll set that to the string get underscore all underscore list underscore data. So you can see as the types get more descriptive and longer, you can see how it'd be very easy to put typos in there if you have to type that same string in multiple places. It'd be really easy to mess it up. But we're saving it in a variable, so that'll help reduce the chances of it being getting messed up. Not saying you can't still screw it up, because you can, but it helps. All right, then we're going to go to our actions index. Now we need to call the server, so that means we need what? What do we use to call a server? Axios. So import Axios from Axios.
When do you use async await and just regular Axios?
Those are two completely different things.
Okay.
Axios is a library for calling stuff. Async await is a way of handling promises. Axios just returns a promise, though. So the async await is different than using .then. .then is just another way to resolve a promise. Async await is doing the exact same thing that .then does, just in a more what looks like a more linear fashion. Just different syntax to do the same thing. But it's not directly related to Axios, other than Axios returns a promise.
Okay. And .then is from ES5?
It's just the way promises used to be built. Because they weren't even part of ES5 even. There was a lot of promise libraries that people built, and I don't know where the .then standard came from, but that's just all promise libraries use .then. And even built-in promises still use .then. Even like with ES6, when promises became standard in the JavaScript library where they're built in, even those you still use .then to resolve. Async await is like this year new. Like the beginning of the year is when async await came out.
Oh.
Yeah. All right. So all that promise talk and the way network calls, we're going to run into some issues here. So let's just start building this out first, and we'll run headlong into them. So we'll say export the function, and we'll say get list data. So based on what we did before, we know a action creator has to return an action. So it has to return an object. has to have a type property. All actions must have a type property. That's the only property that they must have. They can have anything else in them, but they must have a type property. All right, and we're going to set this to types dot get all list data. Use your autocomplete on that. You know, type the capital G and the capital E and then hit enter. Use the autocomplete so you don't introduce typos. Okay, so this is what our action creators look like. This is what you guys have seen. Now, the problem lies in we need to make an asynchronous call. So if we did something like what you would expect, we say like const response equals await axios dot get, and then we do our base URL plus our API key. And then we want to send the response to the reducer so we can update the state. We can do something like payload response. And since we're using await, we need to tell the function to be asynchronous. So we'll say async. Okay, so something like this logically seems like it should work. But I'm sure you guys can assume by the way I'm talking about it, it's probably not going to. But let's play along anyways.
If you're typing in the type, like trying to get the get all list data to autocomplete and it doesn't, and then you check the type folder and everything's saved, what would be my next thing to kind of check? I mean, I wrote it out, but assuming that is not going to probably be okay.
It's the curly brackets here. You were right in assuming something was wrong.
Wait, because I guess
Yeah.
sorry.
Right here. So if you look at types,
Yeah.
like that, export default,
Yeah.
as it should be. So let me go back here. Curly brackets is for stuff that's not export default.
Oh,
For
gotcha.
named exports only.
Okay.
Now when you type it, it should autocomplete. And that's actually a very good indicator that you are doing something wrong. If your autocomplete is not showing you the right information, chances are there's something wrong. With that said, with VS Code on Mac, I do sometimes have issues with my autocomplete stop working and stuff. It does happen. So it's not always 100% true that something's wrong, but it's a good indicator for you to stop and be like, okay, something might be wrong. Let me double check what I'm doing here. All right. So we're going to follow this train, although it's going to end in a horrible train wreck, but we're still going to follow it. So just like before, we know, or if you don't know, I'm going to tell you, whatever is returned from our action creator, our action gets passed to the reducer. So let's go to our reducer from here. So we're going to go down to reducers, and we're going to go to list reducer. And we'll set up our case for our get list data type. So inside of our switch, I'm going to say case types with an S dot get all list data. And right now, I'm not going to assume anything. I'm just going to console dot log list reducer, and then console log the action. All right, and then for right now, I'm just going to say return state. It would have worked without that return state. I could have just let it fall through to the default and it would have done the same thing. But we're going to need that return statement eventually anyway, so I'm just going to put it there. But for anybody snarky in the group, yes, I know it doesn't have to be there and it would work the same. Everybody good? Everybody need a second? You good? All right. So we'll jump over from components. We'll go into our list file. And now that we've created an action, we could call that action to update the state, or at least to test it to get to our console log. But anytime we're interacting with the Redux state in our component, we need what? What do we need from React Redux to bring our component so our component could interact with Redux? Connect. There you go. You guys got it. Now it's connect.
If we say it enough.
Just keep answering connect every time. You guys will get there eventually.
We didn't want to say it.
So import curly brackets, connect from React Redux. All right, and then we'll go ahead and import our action creator. So we'll say import curly brackets from backup directory actions. And then in the curly brackets, we'll start typing out, and you should see get list data. The import statements are really finicky with the autocomplete. So sometimes it works great. Other times, especially when you're importing from the file system, it could be really wonky. Even node modules sometimes. So although I keep telling you guys, use your autocomplete, also remember it's not always 100% accurate. Just like sometimes your code editor will give you red lines when there's not an error in your code. The code editor is just trying to interpret the code. It doesn't necessarily mean your code's going to work or not work. Just because the code editor says something doesn't mean it's true. It's a good indicator though, and you should, hey, something might be wrong here. All right, down at the bottom, I'm going to remove list, and I'm going to say connect. We're going to call connect. Does anybody remember how many arguments connect takes? 2. What's the first one? Function. What do we call that function usually?
Map state to props.
Yeah, you guys got it. Map state to props. Okay. Do we have a map state to props right now? No, and we don't need one. Map state to props is to pull data from the Redux store. We're not doing that yet. So if you're not using map state to props, you could pass in null. And then the second argument, the one that everybody always has the hardest time with, is our action creators. And then we just do that in an object. And so I'm going to break this up onto multiple lines again. I'm going to say get list data. And remember, you're in an object. So get list data is set to get list data. For some of you more adventurous people, maybe you've looked at Redux Online and you've seen the second argument of connect. They do a function called map dispatch to props. Has anybody seen that? Good. We won't talk about it then. All I'll say about it is it does almost the same thing. Yes, it does give you some advantages, but it makes this even more complex than it already is. So I don't like teaching of using the second one as a function because it works just as well doing an object, and it's a little bit more straightforward. So it's more confusing than this, if you can imagine it. So anyways, if you see it, it is out there. It does have some advantages, but I've never run into actually really needing it. But anyways, that aside. So we've called connect, we've passed it, map state to props, or in this case null. We've given it our action creators. And then that's going to return a function, and we're going to call that function. And what does that function take? What do we pass into that second function? Our component. In this case, yes, list. But more generically, the component that you're trying to connect to Redux. All right, so that should connect in our action creators. Now we can actually try calling it to test it. So up at the top of list, we'll add component did mount. And in it, we'll say this dot props dot get list data, and we'll call it. All right. Anybody running yet? Yes. Yep. If you got an error, don't freak out. Everybody got an error. This would be the one time, probably not the one time, but one of the times if you didn't get an error, you did something wrong.
Definitely.
So we get this error that some mumbo jumbo about actions must be plain objects, use custom and aware for async actions. So without knowing too much, we can see that we have something to do with async as the problem. So if we go back to our actions index where we have our get list data, the problem is Redux expects all actions to be an object. Okay? That's what an action has to be. That's what an action is. An action is an object that has a type property. That is an action. So if your action creator doesn't return an object, Redux doesn't know what to do with it, and it throws that error. And you might be looking at this saying, well, it does return an object. It does not, though. So you got to remember, when a function runs, it runs from beginning to end almost instantly in less than a millisecond, in like 1/100th of a millisecond. Code runs exceedingly fast. Now, the way we have this set up, we're making a call here. So we're saying wait here and then return. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but in the meantime, this function's already completed running. And it's already returned something initially. As soon as you called it, it returned something. And it wasn't this because this wasn't ready yet. Okay, functions always have to return something. Even if it is undefined, it still returns something. Like when you run console.log in the console and you get undefined under it. That's what console.log returns. It returns undefined. Because nothing was returned from it. But something is still ultimately returned. Okay? When you do an async function, that function will automatically return a promise. Okay? A promise is not an object, and Redux doesn't know what to do with it. So to fix this, we can make this, get rid of async, get rid of await, okay? So the problem is, put a fine point on it, is that this function must instantly return an object. Otherwise, Redux doesn't know how to handle it. Okay? If it doesn't return an object, Redux is like, I don't know what to do. So we cannot directly use a promise in here because it needs to return this object right away. Now, there's ways around it we're going to eventually get to. We're going to handle this one a little bit differently. But for all intents and purposes, the problem is the function's not returning an object, so we have to let the function return an object. So if we look at the code now it's working, kind of. But our payload now is a promise, which is still useless to us. So this console log, if you remember, is in list reducer. This is the console log. So when our action makes it to here, our action.payload is a promise. It still doesn't have any data that we could use to set the state. And we have the same problem here. This function has to instantly return an object. If it doesn't, once again, it breaks Redux and it doesn't know what to do. So we can't handle it in the action creator, and we can't handle it in the reducer. Where the hell do we deal with our promise? Well, the answer is in middleware. Now we're going to, right now, we're just going to npm install some middleware. Okay? We're not going to dive deep into middleware right now. We have other stuff we need to move on to. But anytime you're doing asynchronous actions with Redux, which you're always going to be doing asynchronous actions with Redux, you need some kind of middleware to deal with promises. We're going to start with one, and then we're going to move to a better one, but we're going to just start with a very simple one. And when we start talking about middleware in depth, we're going to actually recreate the one we're going to use right now. We're going to rebuild the same functionality. But for now, we're just going to npm install it. So let's go to our terminals. Make sure you're in the Redux to-do list. I'm going to turn the light on because it's like overly dark and projector is blinding me.
The last rooms where they show you. Yeah.
All right. We'll take a quick break in a minute, guys. So just bear with me for a second. All right. So we're going to make sure you're in the right directory, and then npm install -- save, and it's called Redux -promise. This is one of those times where people download this by the millions, and there's an even more popular one that we're going to recreate called Thunk. Interesting name. People thunk, Thunk, like I thunk about it, or the noise. People download this stuff by the millions. It is literally a couple lines of code to write either one of them, and it just blows my mind. Anyways, but it is pretty hard to, I guess, understand middleware a little bit. So we're going to npm install -- save Redux promise. Enter. Should install fairly quick. It's, like I said, a couple lines of code. But you got all the other baggage that goes with installing packages, which is... That's fine. We can still code. All right. Once you got the npm install running, even if it's not done yet, jump back to your code. When we use middleware, we have to set middleware up. It doesn't just, we can't just install and say, okay, it's good to go. We have to actually use it. So we're going to go back to our main index file, the one that's directly inside of SRC, where we set up our app. All right. And then in our import statements, we're going to import Redux promise from Redux promise. If you're just still installing, you might not have got the autocomplete on it. That's just because it's still installing. That just means your package JSON file probably hasn't updated yet. All right, now that we have middleware, we actually need another helper function from Redux to use that middleware. So where we did create store, so we already have an import from Redux, we're going to add a comma and import a second thing from Redux called apply middleware. All right, so now that we have apply middleware and we have some middleware, Redux promise, we're going to go to where we're creating our store, and we're going to pass in some more information into create store. So the first argument of create store is still the root reducer that describes and builds our state. The second argument is any default state. We're going to just make that an empty object. And then the third argument is middleware. So we're going to call apply middleware. It's a function. We're going to call it. And then we're going to pass it in any middleware. So we're going to pass in Redux promise. Now, once again, we're going to talk about middleware in more detail next week. Right? So do your best to try not to get hung up on it right now. We will talk about it. What it's doing right this second isn't overly important, but we will talk about it, so you will learn it. But now that we've added the middleware, if we go back to our app and we look at our payload, you'll notice magically now we have all the data from the server. Now it just works.
Can you go back to the index.js?
I can. But our code went from not working to we had a promise in our reducer. We did this little bit of setup. Now magically, our reducer has the right information in it. It's like magic.
Mine has a problem somewhere. It says it can't find Redux promise in.
You didn't install it, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
I see where
it's not a
from.
directory.
Okay.
Yeah. There you go.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. There you go. Anybody else have any issues? Everybody got their data? Everybody check it, make sure. So in your terminal under payload, you should see data and then to-dos. So payload, data, to-dos. So that means we actually have our list data in our reducer now. And we didn't have to do anything with the promise whatsoever. No async await, no .then, nothing. We just made the call, passed it into our action, and magically when it made it to the reducer, our data was there. So index actions, all we did was make the call, save it into the response, put it on payload, and by the time it makes it to this console log, boom, it has the data. Okay? We'll talk more about how that actually works and what it's actually doing when we talk about middleware. But for now, just be thankful that it's handling it for us. So now that we know we have our data, we could return a new state. So we can say ... state. And then we want to update the all property. And we're going to get our data from action.payload.data.photos. Okay, so that should be updating our Redux state with our to-do data. I'm going to clear out this console log just to clear up any mess. So now what we could do, our Redux state should be being updated. So now we can go back to our list component and we can try and pull the data from the Redux state and loop through it and add it to the DOM. Everybody good here? Yeah, good. All right, so now we'll go to list. So we already have connect, but now we want to pull information from the Redux state. So if we want to pull information from the Redux state, what do we need? Anybody know? One of you knows. I know it. One of you knows. What do we use to pull the information from Redux state?
The State to something. State.
I'll take it. Map state to props.
Yes. Yes. I got 2 out of the 4 words. 2 out of the 3 words.
Hey man, I knew you had it. You had it. All right. So at the bottom here, we'll define our map state to props function. Anytime you're pulling information from the Redux state into a component, map state to props. You're mapping the Redux state to your component's props. If I say it enough times, you'll at least remember the words. Map state to props. That will get the Redux state passed to it. And then we'll return objects and we'll say totos. And those totos are going to come from state dot list dot all. And then inside of our connect, we're going to replace null with map state to props. And then to find out if it worked, inside of render, we'll console log our props. Console.log list props. And now when it runs, we should see the initial console log with an empty array. Make the request to the server. Should we render? And then we should have some items in our props. Still need the code. I will come right back to it. I just want to make sure it worked. So list props. Totos. Boom. So you can see it at the end here. Totos array 0. Totos array 4.
Could you go back to it?
Yes. Anybody not getting their data needs help? Everybody's good? Yes, you're good, or yes, you need help, or you just need a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's happening or not happening? So again, the reducer. We're just not. The data is just not updating. I used to have to replace null with absolute props. There you go. Anybody else?
Let's try it out.
Yeah, it's underneath.
Oh, the
Right
transmitter.
chair.
Not bad. Sorry.
What? What is it?
Right by your, under your mask. If you look, yeah.
So it's like the answer too?
No, I was just throwing it up in the air. Because I was like,
I didn't even see it.
looking it. I just got loose.
Any conversation? Yeah.
It's very solid.
All right, everybody got their data? Everyone got data? All right, let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then when we come back, we'll try and display the data. We might not make it to Redux form today.
No. We needed that. We were gonna use.
We'll hit it first thing next week.
Okay, so we might not have it.
We're supposed to start trying to implement.
Brett was a little excited when he found out we were doing Redux form today.
And we might get to the beginning of it.
Okay, we'll see. Not a big deal.
We're going as fast as we can.
We do it at the